Hey everyone, my name's Ben. I'm a certified interpretive guide with St. Charles County Parks here at the Historic Daniel Boone Home. And we're going to highlight a specific artifact that we've got in the Boone Home, which is the portrait I've got up here behind me. Now this is not the original. This is a copy that was done in the late 19th century. The original actually now sits at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. But the original version of this was done in July of 1820 by an artist named Chester Harding. And the really amazing thing about this is this portrait was one of the only ones Daniel ever sat for in 1820. His daughter Jemima actually had to talk him into doing it. You know, Daniel's the type of person who enjoys spending time out in the wilderness. He's someone who's comfortable going on hunts that last for 2 years. So you can probably imagine he's not the type of guy who's going to enjoy sitting for such a long period of time and having a portrait done of him. So his daughter Jemima actually had to talk him into getting this done. And when it was finished, Daniel wasn't the biggest fan of this. Daniel thought that this portrait made him look old and sickly. And we got to think about where Daniel is at this point in his life. For one thing, the man you're seeing in this portrait is 85 years old. This man has fought in 4 wars. This is a man who's never really known stability in his life. He's had to move around constantly. This is a man who would lose 3 of his children. 7 years before this portrait was done, he lost his wife Rebecca. And he's been sick on and off for the past year when this portrait is being done. So he really was kind of old and sickly when this portrait's being done. But he's earned the right to grow to old age, to being a grandfather in this house. Now his son Nathan tells us that the original lacked these rich, full cheeks that Daniel had all throughout his life. And so when you see this one, you'll actually notice he's got a nice rosy color in his cheeks, and you can see that this is more of a continuation upon that original one. But it's still based off of what Harding did in 1820. And what's really amazing here is you're not seeing Daniel Boone the Disney star. You're not seeing Fess Parker, for those of you who watch the Daniel Boone TV show. You know, Daniel is sitting in front of a very basic background. He's wearing just a hunter's jacket, a work shirt. He's not wearing any fancy clothes. You know, we're not seeing Louis XIV at Versailles in France. We're seeing Daniel Boone the man. A man who's become kind of a quiet professional, living out the final chapter of his life with his son and with his grandchildren. And despite everything Daniel would do in American history, from fighting in our revolution to opening up pathways into the center of the country, Daniel would say, "While the world has taken great liberties with me, still I have been but a common man." We see him as Daniel Boone the man in this portrait. So here on the other side of the house, we're in the sitting room for Daniel's bedroom, and we've got a painting in here that shows that Daniel's story doesn't end with his death, September 26, 1820. We're getting into this idea of his legacy. So the painting I've got up here, this was done by an artist named George Caleb Bingham in the 1850s, and it's called Through the Gap. This is depicting Daniel taking his family through the Cumberland Gap from east of the Appalachian Mountains into Kentucky. So I'm going to focus on a couple different points in here and then talk about what all this means. So starting front and center, we've got Daniel Boone. Now you might notice something kind of strange about what he's wearing. He's wearing all white. They are on a cross-country expedition going through mountains, and Daniel is wearing an all-white outfit, and he's even got more of a cravat, a neckerchief, something that's a little bit fancier for what he's doing. So this is not what you would expect Daniel to be wearing going through the Cumberland Gap. Now next to him, on the horse here, we've got his wife Rebecca. Well, Rebecca is riding this white horse, and she's wearing, instead of a straight down work dress with a bonnet, which is much more the style for women in the early 18th century, she is wearing more of a shawl, which doesn't fit the fashion for that time period. And also, horses, for something like this, would have been pack animals. They're carrying your supplies, they're carrying the things you need to survive. They wouldn't have been ridden through the mountains. And so we see that all looks a little strange, like Bingham is trying to portray something here. The background of this painting is dark and stormy. Daniel is leading these people into a bright light. And we're starting to get to this idea that Bingham is very much reminding the viewers of this painting of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt. This is supposed to be a religious image, and this was done in the 1850s, around 1850, 1851. Now let's go back 2 years. California, 1849. They discover gold on the West Coast. Now there's thousands of Americans dropping everything at their homes and traveling out west to try and make it rich in California. And they figure, who better to promote this movement? This movement that would be called Manifest Destiny, the idea that it was the God-given right of European Americans to settle from east to west. They figured, who better to promote this movement than Daniel Boone? And so 30 years after Daniel's death, we're getting Daniel Boone's legend. This is where this idea of Fess Parker's Daniel Boone is going to come in. Disney's Daniel Boone is going to come in. Now, you will notice Daniel is not wearing a coonskin cap in this. But this is Daniel Boone the legend. And George Caleb Bingham, who is painting the legend, was an apprentice of Chester Harding, who painted Daniel Boone the man. And so we see how Daniel's story changes over the course of 30 years and how his legacy impacts this country.